Extroversion. So let's jump right in. And in this video, we're going to do a super duper deep dive in extroversion. We're also going to look at introversion and ambivert, which are part of the continuum of introvert to extrovert. And we're also going to look at the different facets because there's two major ways to look at extroversion. We're going to look at the trait descriptions. We're going to look at the keys, like what really drives extroverts, what are their key motivations, how do they think, feel, and behave. And then we're going to also look at some of the outcomes, like what can you expect, what can you predict in terms of life outcomes for people that are high in extroversion. In part two, we're going to be able to go into depth about how to read people and know when you're in a social situation, whether you're dealing with someone who's an extrovert. It could be a family member that you already know. It could be someone you just met at a party or out and about. How will you be able to know? And then the best ways to communicate with extroverts. And then last but not least, no one is just one thing. So we want to look at how extroversion plays with the other big 5 traits, high openness, conscientiousness, agreeableness, neuroticism, and see what some of those permutations and combinations would look like. So let's jump in. And before we get started, if you haven't taken the personality test, take it below. It's just one click. It's a very quick test. It's free. And also, if you want to look at the other traits, please take a look below. We have links to all of them. And without further ado, we will begin. And if you love this content, be sure to subscribe, hit the like button. And if you have any questions, you can ask me in the comments. You can also text me or email me. So, extroversion, what is it? I think the essence of extroversion is using positive emotions and desire to help people, extroverts, move forward towards their goals. And one of the key ways to think about this is that extroverts think in terms of their goals and they think in stories. So in their mind, they have a story of who they are, their identity, and they're, the main character of their movie, if you will. And as the main character of their movie, there's certain things that they believe that are, objects in the world, if you will, that will make them happy. And so as a part of their narrative, they're moving towards these goals. And every time they get closer and closer to those goals, they feel more and more positive emotion. And whenever they stray off the path or they get negative feedback, they literally get negative emotion. In other words, the negative emotion is saying you're off track. The positive emotion saying you're on track, okay? And it's increasing the positive emotion so they can have more energy and vigor to continue towards their goal. Once they receive their goal, once they achieve their goal, what happens is two things. One, they get a boost of positive emotion because they achieved their goal. And second, it validates their story, okay? So in some way, they have a Darwinian relationship with the truth. The truth isn't objective or Newtonian, but it's more Darwinian, and the truth, the story, which acts as a map, did it help you achieve your goal? So I think that's kind of like one great way to think about extroversion. And also extroversion, it's related with dopamine release. So that's how and where all this positive emotion comes from, because it's a dopamine that gets released. It makes a person feel good. It gives them energy. They achieve their goal. More dopamine is released as a reward for achieving the goal. And then a new goal emerges and dopamine is released towards pursuing that goal. And then once it's achieved, they get pleasure of that as well. And so you have this positive feed cycle that more extroversion leads to more positive emotion, leads to more vigor, pursuit of goals, leads to more likelihood of achieving the goals, which leads to more dopamine release, which leads to even more extroversion. So what are the traits associated with it, right? And I think there's 2 great ways to really think about it. There's 2 major facets. And one of them is goal pursuit, right? But the other one isn't just goal pursuit, but affiliation or agency pursuit, because there's different ways to achieve goals, right? You can achieve goals by being really organized and industrious and planning really well, or you can achieve your goals by being extremely creative and thinking outside the box and creating something new, or you can achieve your goals by working with people. And assertives are naturally of the type that achieve their goals by working with people. So they fall into 2 facets. One is assertiveness and the other one is enthusiasm. So So assertiveness deals with dominance and submission, okay? And assertiveness is basically someone that has a strong pursuit of a goal. They take charge, they persevere, they're a very goal-oriented leader. At least they see themselves as good leaders. People that are extroverts and high in assertiveness will always think that they're a great leader. They're captivating, influential, persuasive. They're very quick to share their opinion. You don't even have to ask them what they think, they'll tell you. And they try to be the first to act. So there is no inhibition in terms of taking charge. This is the assertive personality. And then the enthusiasm deals with sociability. It runs from aloof all the way to gregarious. This is someone that makes friends easily. They're easy to get to know with. They have a lot of positive energy. They're always smiling. They're engaging. They like to keep other people close. They get excited easily. They tell you everything about themselves. They warm up very quickly. They're enthusiastic. They laugh a lot. They like to have fun. They love and enjoy these sort of social situations. So this is kind of in a nutshell, the two major facets, assertiveness and enthusiasm. And you could see how they play off of each other. You know, an extrovert, when faced with a problem they've never faced before, one of their go-to ways of solving the problem is going to be to talk to people. They're going to call a bunch of their buddies and say, hey, what do you suggest I should do in this situation? What do you think is going to be the best solution to this problem? Some of the other types, like someone high in conscientiousness, they might get into research and planning and organizing as the main method of solving a problem. And someone high in openness will be very creative in terms of solving a problem. So this kind of gives us an idea of what it is like to be an extrovert. In terms of trait description, and you could think of these as a scale, of course, from extrovert to ambivert to introvert. Someone that is sociable versus retiring, fun-loving versus sober, affectionate versus reserved, spontaneous versus inhibited, someone that is quiet versus someone that's talkative, especially in large groups, someone that's friendly versus someone that's aloof. So another area that there's a huge and very interesting difference between extroverts and introverts is the cognition. And that is how they process information and how they filter information as they're engaging with the world. So extroverts excel at social situations that are very complex socially, that are dynamic, that are flowing and quickly changing. So what extroverts can do so well is that they can multitask. They can do many different things at once, which means they can easily divert and diversify their attention across many different things. Also, they're really good at not getting distracted. So they might have 4 or 5 different things that they're focusing on, and if the 6th thing comes, they're really good at shutting that out. And then once they're done here, they move on to the next thing. So they're really good with quick, short tasks that move forward quickly, and they're great at these social environments. A good example of this would be like being a bartender, right? You're taking orders, you have a bunch of orders, you complete the orders, you move on to the next set of orders, and you don't want to be distracted while you're going through that process. At the same time, you need to multitask so you could add and append orders as you're doing this. Introverts, on the other hand, are good at the opposite. They're really good at focusing, solving very complex problems. They get distracted far more easily, so they need quieter spaces to do their work. And they're better at persevering and having long attention towards finishing a goal that takes a longer period of time. So they have longer attention spans, whereas extroverts have shorter attention spans. So those are some of the major differences in terms of the trait description, in terms of the difference between introverts and extroverts. Then ambiverts are right in the middle. They're great at listening, they're great at being extroverted, and they're also great at being introverted. And out of everyone, ambiverts make the best salespeople because they have the ability to listen so well. So now let's look at some life outcomes. Being an extrovert is associated with a lot of really positive life outcomes, right? So for one, people that are high in extroversion are going to have higher social status. They're going to have higher incomes. They're going to be happier at work. They're going to have better job satisfaction. They're going to get promoted more quickly. They're going to have more friends. Introverts, on the other hand, are going to have deeper relationships. They're going to have more influence and dominance. They're going to have more sexual partners. There's this really interesting dynamic between introversion and exposure to risk and safety, and there's a strong relationship. And this is where evolution is so dynamic in a way, because not every strategy is always good. And in this case, if you're extroverted, since you're more sexually promiscuous, you're more of a thrill seeker, you're more impulsive in your behavior, okay? And the reason why that happens is because if things are good now and the story is fitting, in other words, the story of where you and who you are and where you want to go, if things are working, then you're more likely to double down on what's working right now. You're more likely to take an impulsive action and gamble because you're discounting the future because the present is so good. And that manifests in many different ways. They're more likely to take drugs. They're more likely to have thrill-seeking behaviors. They're more likely to have more sexual partners. They're more likely to have risky sexual behavior. That's part of the thrill-seeking, discounting the future for the present. But that exposes them to higher risks, right? And so introversion is associated with it's protective against higher infection rates and diseases. In areas in the world where there's high infection rates and high number of diseases, people tend to be more introverted as a response. Other life outcomes. Extroverts are also have higher success, marriage success. They also have higher levels of infidelity. They tend to be more emotionally intrusive in the extreme ends of extroversion. In the extreme ends of extroversion, this is where the negative behaviors are more prominent. Impulsivity, thrill-seeking, gambling, risk-taking, and so on. So now let's jump into how can you tell if you're meeting an extrovert. So this is part two. This might be someone you already know, it might be a friend, a relative, it might be someone you just met. So how can you tell if they're an extrovert? Well, there's a couple of major cues that will tell you whether they're an extrovert or not. So first, when you first meet them, do they hold a strong eye contact with you? People that are extroverted are more likely to engage with eye contact in the first meeting. So if they're holding eye contact with you, that's one sign they're extroverted. Another is the amount of gestures they use. Are they using a lot of gestures? Are they gregarious in their body language? Are they easygoing and fun-loving? How much time do they spend with people, right? Do you see them in a large group of people where they're engaging and they're enjoying the entire group and then they're moving around, or are they more of like a one-on-one conversationalist? So people that are higher in extroversion are going to be more group-oriented in terms of their conversations. Now, when they're having conversations, what do they talk about and how? This is a big one. Extroverts are far more likely to talk in terms of stories. The reason is because they think in stories, right? So they're going to tell more stories, and when they tell the stories, they're going to talk about their goals in the stories. The stories are going to also show a lot of social relationships. They're going to tell stories about their friends and their family members. The stories are going to have a positive sentiment. They're going to use more positive words than negative words. They're also going to be more likely to have sexually explicit content. Extroverts are more likely to share those sort of intimate details than introverts and ambiverts. If you and an extrovert came into a neutral environment that you've never been to before, for example, they're more likely to have a positive bias towards that neutral environment. So those are some big ones. Another big one is like, do they overshare things about their lives? Are they telling you their entire life story very quickly? Sign that they're an extrovert. Do they chime in and have opinions very quickly? Or are they more keeping the opinions to themselves? That's a sign they're an extrovert. Are they the first to act? Are they trying to lead the group? Those are signs of extroversion. So all those are really big markers for it. So whenever you see them, the best way to think about them and to respond is that kind of like a warning system. Okay, you have the marker for it. Now look for other markers to see if they're there. And then what you can do is you can set up dialogues and have conversations with the person, test that hypothesis, see if the marker is accurate. Because the only way to know if someone is, if a certain trait is dominant is to know why that trait is manifesting. Is it a character adaptation? In other words, is it something that they learned? Is it something that they're only doing now? Maybe someone's very gregarious and they're talking and they're having a great time and they're being very sociable. And maybe it's because they've had a few drinks, right? It could be other reasons. So you need to find out why. And then you also, of course, need to see a pattern that this behavior happens consistently. And then you know that this is a dominant trait. So those will kind of give you an idea. And by knowing what the traits are and the different facets, you can always ask them questions like, what do you do for fun? Or what did you do yesterday? Someone that is extroverted is going to first be more likely to share that information with you. And when they share that information, they're going to tell you more a story. They're going to tell you, they're going to include people in it. They're going to tell you how they felt. Their world is more of a social world. It's more of a story-centric world. So you're going to see that come out. Other things, extroverts are more likely is like traveling, living abroad, right? If you hear these sort of things, these are also markers for. The key motivations for extroverts tend to be social contact, intimacy, interdependence, status, power, and having a positive effect. If the extrovert had a motto, it would be get along and get ahead. So that kind of gives you an overview of extroversion. Now, how does it relate with the other traits? Because no one is just one thing, right? So once you find out that the person's main trait, that they're high in extroversion, that's their dominant way of interacting with the world, how does that play with the other traits? So let's look at openness. Openness is the trait that's associated with creativity and intellect. People that are high in openness have a propensity towards beauty, art, music, all the aesthetics. They're the creative types, and they're also the intellectual types. If someone is very philosophical, that means that they like to think deeply about ideas, unpack ideas, and explore new ideas. If they're an artist or a musician, that means that they like to, feel deeply and explore, certain aspects of themselves and then manifest it through music or through their art. So think of how those things would play with someone that's extroverted. If they're extroverted and also high in openness, you're going to see a proclivity for two things. One is novelty, these new things, whether they're ideas or music or art. So manifesting these things. And they're going to have a double side. One side might be impulsive and the other side might be novelty seeking. So they're going to be more open-minded to trying new things that are way outside the box that most people would never even consider, much less try. If they're low in openness and high in extroversion, then there's a pretty good chance that they're going to be, in terms of their philosophy, in terms of their worldview, they're going to be more conservative. They're not going to be thinking outside the box. Their goals are going to be more concrete. They're going to be more tangible, and there's also a depth of feeling that comes with a high openness. There's also some depth of feeling that comes with being an introvert. Introverts tend to be more reflective. People high in openness tend to be extremely reflective. Extroverts that are low in openness are not going to be very self-reflective. So that's one of the downsides of being low openness. So they're going to have a conventional attitude and they're going to be assertive about it. And now imagine how it plays with agreeableness. So agreeableness is people that are compassionate, polite, they have empathy towards people, they like to get along, they like to be helpful. People that are high in extroversion tend to be people, and so are agreeable people. They're people too. They're like the social glue. Those two things would complement each other pretty well. There's an element of impulsivity that both of them have. So one is people that are highly agreeable tend to be a little bit more compliant. So on one end of the spectrum, since they're more compliant, they're more likely to be a compulsive shopper, for example. Extroverts that are discounting the future and they want what they want now because it'll make them happy also might be more likely to compulsively shop, for example. So those two things kind of line up in not the best way. Another example would be people that are high in agreeableness also engage in less risky behavior. And that's because they're more truthful and straightforward. And so when you're truthful and straightforward, you're more likely to tell and disclose things to the other person that don't line up with your goals, especially if it's like a one-night stand, right? So high agreeableness is probably going to decrease risky promiscuous sex for someone that's highly impulsive and highly extroverted. They're more likely to balance that piece out. Conscientiousness is the best moderator of impulsive behavior, because one of the major facets of conscientiousness is self-discipline. So self-discipline regulates discounting the future for the present. It does the opposite. It sacrifices the present for the future. So one of the best ways to moderate impulsive behavior that you see on the thrill-seeking aspect on the extroversion side is just to focus more on the self-discipline and high conscientiousness side, and that'll usually balance it out. And then last but not least, is neuroticism. So neuroticism is the propensity to feel negative emotions. Self-doubt is a good example of it. These are things that freeze you from moving forward, like procrastination, or things that make you defensively aggressive, like anger. So if you're high in extroversion, and that's your core trait or your predominant trait, and then that's your high in neuroticism, the difference between these two levels is essentially going to be your self-esteem. All the positive emotions you have about yourself and the self-story that you tell yourself that is positive and good, versus the self-doubt and the stories of self-doubt that you tell yourself. So ideally, if you're high in neuroticism, you're higher in extroversion, and so it ends up to a positive self-esteem. And then there's low agreeableness. So this one's kind of dangerous, and I'll go over the danger zone to some degree. And I had a friend like this, so this is very, being with him was a nightmare a lot of the time. And he was extroverted, mostly on the assertive side, so he always wanted to get his way, and it was about him achieving his goals. He was low in agreeableness, so he was not very considerate about what other people thought, wanted, felt. He had low empathy. He could care less about others, which also puts him in the dark triad. That's the danger zone. Like, that's where psychopathy falls. Machiavellism falls into that. Manipulation. Like, these are personalities that maybe you don't want to hang out with. But so he was high in extroversion. He was low in agreeableness, which means he didn't care if he ran you over when it came to achieving his goals. He was enthusiastic and charming enough to be able to get away with it. Okay? He was highly conscientious in the order side, so he was pathologically a perfectionist, which also meant that if something was out of order, he was assertive enough to tell you, and it also made him hyper-judgmental. And he was neurotic, which means as different things came up, he would notice negative things that would come up more frequently than positive things. And so that's an example of a dynamic personality. his number one trait was extroversion. His number two trait was conscientiousness, and then it was being disagreeable, which also makes him competitive and neurotic. It gives you an idea of what that personality would be like. So when you're meeting someone, you want to go through this gamut and see how they, what level they're at more or less, and then how their combination, how their personality would combine between these different traits and how it would manifest in the world. And then you can think about best ways to communicate with them and essentially talk their language. So if you enjoyed this video, be sure to hit the like button, subscribe, do the little bell. And if you have any questions, hit me in the comments, or you can text me or email me. So hope you enjoyed it, and I'll see you in the next one.